So, what's hiding in the little bag today? No, it's not a well-priced home utensil, although depending on how you look at it, it might be just that. No, what's coming out of the bag is a ThinkPad 600, a beautiful business notebook from 1998, and the reason why it's in the bag is because it's positively disgusting. And I don't really like keeping dirty electronics in the house. I mean, if I'm taking something dirty in, I'll clean it first. But when I saw this thing, I was just so amazed at the amount of grime and filth that I decided it needed to be preserved for all to see. So I put it in this bag until I had the time to work on it, and well, here you are. And well, what we have here is a classic situation with a classic computer, and the reason this particular one looks as bad as it does is due to the special rubberized finish they used to use and still do on some portable electronics. When it's new, it gives the computer a premium feeling surface, it makes it smooth and soft to the touch, but with age and abuse, that coating breaks down and it really wears terribly. It gets sticky and starts to pick up all the dust and crap that touches it, and all that gets embedded in the surface and it's pretty much impossible to clean. And you might think that it's going to be the worst on the top, but flipping it you can see that it's equally disgusting on the bottom, maybe even more so. It also has some broken bits of plastic and some weird modifications. And you might ask, where in the heck did this thing came from? And well, as per usual, it comes from my buddy the recycler, who takes massive amounts of old electronics and recycles them for precious metals. But when he comes across something interesting, computer hardware, he calls me up and I usually buy it off him. So on one occasion I was visiting, he told me, "Oh man, look at this nasty thing. It'd be great for a channel." And I agreed, so I took it home. And the first thing I wanted to do was just to do an initial wipe down and try to get as much of that crap off as possible. So I got out my long-suffering microfiber cloth, and this poor thing has seen some crap, let me tell you. I've started wiping it down with some alcohol, but as expected, it didn't really want to come off, since like I've said, that rubbery coating has all that crap embedded in it, and the only real way of getting it clean is to rub it off completely. But still, I wanted to at least make sure it's not completely disgusting before I start working on it, and this bottom side was just yuck. I wanted to peel off those labels because I was hoping I could maybe clean them up and reapply them later. And underneath that was the same rubbery coating, but it was so degraded that it was eager to come off. And I found that using some WD-40 on sticky things actually works wonders, and yeah, it had no trouble removing that remaining nastiness, which left me with a nice smooth shiny black plastic underneath. This gave me hope for that nasty top lid, and we'll see what we can do about that later. Apart from being dirty and damaged, this guy was surprisingly complete. I mean, it seemed to have all the hardware installed, including the battery, which isn't always the case. The only thing I was kind of puzzled over was this piece of plastic covering the spot where I'd expect to see the optical drive. It seemed to be glued in for some reason. Also, when cleaning around the keyboard and the screen, I saw something that, I kid you not, looked like used motor oil. I mean, seriously, it had some weird black shmoo in the crevices around the brightness slider, and I was just, what the heck? So I took some alcohol and cleaned around with it. Now, what I usually do with random notebooks I save from trash is I hook them up to a universal laptop power supply, but it just so happens that recently I also bid on like 20 untested chargers for like 20 bucks, and among them was a vintage IBM power supply, and it was the exact match for this ThinkPad. Unlike more modern notebooks, which in my experience usually work on 19 to 20 volts, these ones actually used to take 16 volts, and if you ever get second-hand power supplies or even brand new third-party ones, you should always test them using a multimeter, and even though this one was a bit high, it shouldn't matter too much, half a volt here or there. Anyway, apart from checking them with my meter, I also had to get them organized. I mean, god damn, the way these were just tossed in the bag like a bit of fishing kit, jeez. So I made sure to unwrap them and also clean the cables real good. I mean, you wouldn't believe how deceptively dirty these can be. Some of them had cable ties built in, and for the ones that didn't, I just used a rubber band to store them neatly. Yeah, that's much better, and I was happy to see that all of these ended up working. Not bad. So we'll make sure to hook up our ThinkPad here, and holy crap, I could see the charge light coming up, which gave me hope that there was some life left in it. Oh god. I anxiously engaged the power on lever, and the damn thing came to life.
Oh! Oh! Awesome! Oh! Let's go! Oh, heck yeah! Okay, so we have 161 and 163 error, which means that we have to change out the clock battery. Okay, so the trackpad seems to be working. We have this flapping duck thing that IBM had at the time. Let's try setting the date and time and see whether or not it boots. We'll set it to something, I don't know.
These CMOS errors are extremely common across old ThinkPads, and I probably had to replace every single battery on every vintage ThinkPad I had. Sometimes you can boot past this error, I guess depending on the BIOS CMOS, but in this case it wouldn't let me pass. So it was time to turn this thing over and to do some troubleshooting. And while I was here, I wanted to explore some other features. For example, I took the battery out just to make sure it isn't leaking or bulging, and it seemed to be in good shape, although I can't imagine it holding any sort of a charge. I've also taken out the hard drive just to see if it's even in there, and yep, it sure is. Oh, old travel star. Curious to see whether there's anything on there. And apart from the battery and the hard drive, one more thing that's supposed to be in there is a removable CD-ROM drive. And ThinkPads had this neat system with swappable bays, where at this point they started introducing these slimmer, lighter models with only the optical media drive, and if you wanted, you could have swapped it out for a floppy disk drive. And there's a little latch you can push and pull the whole thing out, but I had trouble doing that, and I couldn't figure out, like, did it have the drive in there, or was this just like a plastic blank? But it turns out someone had glued this strip of plastic on top of a busted up CD drive for whatever the reason, so I peeled it off and I could see that there indeed was a drive in there, but it was missing a front panel and it was clearly messed up. Turning on the computer, I could see the LED blinking, so it was definitely getting power, but when I pushed the button, there was just the noise of a tray trying to eject, but yeah, it was all messed up. And that's a problem since we're talking about a machine from '98, and kids' computers used to not have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, so if you wanted to get data on the system, yeah, you had to use a CD or a floppy disk. But Schwabeck, I hear you ask, what about USB? Can't you transfer files using that? Well, I'm glad you asked. I have quite a few computers from the late 90s, and very few had native USB support back in the day, especially the laptops, since that standard was introduced in 96 with USB 1.0, and it wasn't until 98 that the 1.1 revision was introduced, which finally started kicking off the universal serial bus revolution. Apple was famously boasting about adopting it first on its iMac in 98, and yeah, it was very forward-thinking in hindsight, but that doesn't mean that other PC manufacturers weren't jumping on board as well. And I was very happy to find this little secret USB port underneath this plastic flap, which made me chuckle, like it sort of demonstrates how new USB was at the time to have it hidden like some proprietary slot. And you might think you can just stick a thumb drive in there and fire away, but since this thing was designed to run Windows 98, yeah, that wouldn't get USB support until 2nd edition, and even still, it wasn't baked into the OS, you had to load special drivers for USB sticks. Well, we'll get back to that later. For now, let's see what we can do about that CMOS battery. Unscrewing the little trap door on the bottom, we get access to the memory expansion bay, and like we've seen in the BIOS, this thing has 96 megs of RAM, which is really quite a lot. These usually ship with 32 megs, so someone must have upgraded the memory. And there's an empty slot here, so we could up the memory if we really wanted. Anyway, here we also find a little CMOS battery, and it's just a little lithium 3-volt coin cell cell with a little connector. And yeah, you can actually buy these on sites like eBay or AliExpress. They're not overly expensive, but if you don't have one handy and don't feel like waiting on the shipping, I'll show you a dirty hack. I'll just snip this old battery and strip the insulation, which will leave us with this connector and a positive and a negative wire, and we can just solder this to a regular 3-volt lithium battery holder. Now I just happen to have this one, but if you have the one with the leads attached, that'd be even better. I'll clip the legs even shorter just so that it would fit better, and I like to put a little flux paste on the terminals, and I just solder away red to positive, black to negative, and bingo bango, there's our CMOS battery. Pop in a regular 3-volt lithium coin cell, and it's nothing fancy. It's not rechargeable, there are no extra signals to worry about, so you can totally use this. The only issue is it's slightly thicker than the original, but I found that if I nestle it right, I can just barely close the door. With that taken care of, it was time to turn it on again and to see what it would do next. I made sure to put in the wrong date and time, and by golly, after that, the damn thing started booting into Windows 98.
Oh! Yeah! Oh, man.
And man, I've been really lucky with these old hard drives lately, and with the older machines it's super convenient not to have to redo the entire OS again just to play around with it and test it. So that's what I've proceeded to do, and I love exploring these 30-year-old time capsules because they always tell a story, you know, and sometimes it tells you a lot about what this thing did in its past life. And in my case, it was extremely helpful because I finally understood why it was in such a poor condition and why there was used motor oil all over this thing. Just looking on the desktop here, there were numerous pieces of auto diagnostic tools specifically for German cars, Volkswagens, BMWs, and Audis. The entire OS was in German, but I speak enough German to have figured out my way around these apps, and I was curious to try them out. Just going by models alone, I'd say this was used in a mechanics repair shop for late 90s, early 2000s cars. Yeah, everything from checking the fume exhaust system to cracking radio entertainment system codes. Awesome. And everything on here seemed to be working very, very well. The sound, keyboard, the display, which I have to mention, the display is awesome. And even though it's an earlier LCD, it's actually a 1024 by 768 TFT active matrix panel. And if you remember, we did an episode on that 385 model, the ThinkPad, and that was released in 97 and had a horrible DSTN passive matrix panel, and I've talked about how much those sucked. And in comparison to that, this is freaking gorgeous. It works well for both still and moving images with no ghosting or smearing. So damn, it turns out that despite the dirt covered exterior, this thing is actually awesome. But as much as I was having fun with that questionable car cracking software, I really wanted to try out my usual suite of software on here, but there was no real way of talking to this thing since it had a broken optical drive. And yeah, I did try a USB stick, but this thing has Win98 first edition and no support for removable drives. I'd need to upgrade to second edition and load up the drivers myself to get that going. So it was time to see what we can do about that optical drive. I've turned the machine over and I was pretty sure I only had to just undo this latch and pull it out, but it wasn't really budging. I was afraid I was gonna break something, so to avoid doing that, and also because it was freaking charming, I watched this awesome ThinkPad 600 service training VHS someone put up on YouTube. Man, I mean, just look at it, it's beautiful.
I'm excited to introduce you to a new member of the ThinkPad product family. The 2645 ThinkPad 600 comes with two new utilities that are added to easy setup.
And apart from just being cool, I got some useful info straight from the horse's mouth, particularly about the CD drive.
Next we will remove the Ultra Slim Bay device. Again, slide the latch and hold it to the side, and pull forward to remove the device.
So yeah, I wasn't wrong, you really do have to pull it out, but mine was just either stuck or glued, but upon putting all that bulk and muscle of mine to use, it finally popped out, and I could inspect it some more. After peeling off that glued on piece of plastic, I could see some parts were just badly bent and stuck. I've tried pushing the tray out using a paper clip and a screwdriver, but it wasn't working. So I've decided to take it apart because, at this point I had nothing to lose. I couldn't break it anymore. I took out all the visible screws, and that enabled me to get the back connector off, which converts the internal drive's 50-pin connection to this wider one, which then interfaces with the male connector inside the machine. And after popping off all the screws from the side and taking out the plastic rails, I was able to open it up. And after playing with it for a bit, it came out. And after a bit of good old in out, it seemed to be working just fine. So I've put in a couple of screws back in just so it wouldn't fall apart on me, and I was curious to test it out. The little faceplate was missing, so I just pressed the little momentary switch with a screwdriver, and holy smokes, the tray ejected fine, which was awesome. So I loaded up a random burned CD because I didn't want to risk a known good one, and after clicking the tray in place, my god, this thing was spinning up the disc just fine.
Oh god.
I was anxiously waiting for something to happen, and it looked like the damn thing was reading it.
Oh my god.
I could see the CD name under drive D, but when I went to it, it was empty. Huh. I then tried a couple more discs, burned and original, but it just had no luck reading them. I of course tried cleaning out the lens with a bit of alcohol, but that didn't seem to help. And I really can't blame this poor guy. You saw the state it was in, and to be honest, even if it had worked correctly, without that faceplate in place, it would have looked kinda ghetto. So what now? Well, you might know this already, but I have a couple of spare ThinkPads in my collection because I'm very fond of them, and I went through my stash of older IBM laptops in hopes that I would find a compatible drive somewhere among them.
Okay, so after looking through my pile of old ThinkPads, I found this newer ThinkPad R50E, and I have borrowed the CD drive from it, and as far as I can tell, it has the same connection which we can use to adapt to this other interface that this 600 has. So I guess that's what we'll try to do next.
So after taking off that interface adapter, I've realized it's not compatible with the newer one, and it just didn't want to fit.
So I have managed to find the CD drive with the correct interface, and it actually didn't come from IBM. It actually came from this Compaq Armada. And to be honest, what I'd like to do is to just get Windows 98 SC going on this thing and install the appropriate USB drivers, and then I won't really need to use the nope, this is not compatible at all. Nope. Rats. Okay, just got back from my storage. Christ. And I found this beat up ThinkPad T21. And I love how easy this is to do on ThinkPads. For example, on this one you have just a little latch. This thing pops up and you can pull out the drive. And holy crap, we got it. That's awesome. So we'll see whether or not it just slides in. So oh, come on. Please fit, man. So tired of this crap. Ah, fuck. What needs to change? Is it not in the same spot? Oh, man. Oh, Christ. Yeah, I don't think it lines up.
So even though this thing had a compatible interface, the damn connector was in the wrong place. Who does that? Why? But that wasn't going to stop me from having a working optical drive. I've taken that connector from the broken unit and I've transplanted it to this one. And yeah, it was a couple of millimeters of difference, but with that new connector in place, it finally snapped in.
Let's see. Oh, oh, oh God. Well, let's see whether or not it works. Stupid thing. Okay, it's flashing green. That's good. Does it eject? Yeah, it does. Shut up.
So now the only thing to do was to test it out. Upon turning the machine on, the drive lit up, the tray would open when prompted, and this thing was reading discs like a maniac. It really did work well. Awesome.
Ah! Heck yeah, man. Oh, that's awesome.
And one thing I forgot to mention, yeah, this guy actually reads DVDs as well, so this was a decent upgrade from the stock CD-ROM drive. Killer. So now the only thing to do is to transplant a couple of parts to this drive, like that plastic frame with the latch, so it wouldn't just fall out. And yeah, with that I finally had a way of loading software up on this guy. And what kind of software? Well, one reason these old ThinkPads are kind of desirable nowadays is because they're actually quite capable DOS gaming machines. In terms of performance, it's actually quite an overkill. Mine has a 300 MHz Pentium 2 and 96 megs of RAM, which would have been a pretty freaking high-end system in '98, especially for a portable, so it has no issues blasting through countless DOS classics. But one thing that might give you issues with DOS games on Pentium laptops is sound, since they often don't have good compatibility with Sound Blaster and AdLib, but this guy here does pretty decent in terms of SB emulation. It's a Cirrus Logic Crystal Clear SC4237B, and I thought it sounded alright, but then again I'm not a DOS purist, so some people might disagree. And I'll say it again, for a notebook screen from the late 90s, I mean, this is about as good as it gets. And games really do look awesome on it, even though I couldn't get them running in 800 by 600 for some reason. And if you're up for some Windows 98 gaming, again, given the performance this thing puts out, it's more than capable, and with that DVD drive installed, you can even load up some DVD titles, although I would up the storage on this thing if I was using it for that. And I guess the only other thing I wanted to do on this thing is to utilize that USB port, and for that we'd have to go to a newer version of Win98, and since I was confident the optical drive was working fine, I decided to go ahead and pop in that 98SC upgrade disc. And I mean, second edition is just a necessary upgrade either way in my opinion, and it's going to give us better experience overall, and I chose not to do the entire thing all over, but to simply upgrade the existing version, which really went without a hitch. Man, I enjoyed some downtime with these gorgeous low fidelity graphics. I mean, look at all these people from the 90s excited to try out Windows 98 for the first time. Lovely. And about half an hour later, I was back at the desktop, and yep, sure enough, second edition was proudly presented in my system settings. Now, I remember getting a USB driver when I did a video on my A20M, and yeah, I still have the disk I burned for that occasion, so I just copied the files from it and decided to run the included utility. After that, I restarted the machine, and upon getting back to the desktop, I could see some activity with the driver library being updated, and after checking the device manager, I could see that the external drive seemed to be recognized and working fine. So I went to my computer, and by golly, there it was.
Here it is. Awesome. Oh, it's not formatted. Alright.
And the thing was copying the files to and from the drive perfectly, and even with this thing having a slow USB 1 interface, I had this video file around 400 megs and it played that right off the drive with no problem. Just awesome.
Yeah.
And because of this, the foundation this gives us, we're going to announce some great new products today.
So at this point I pretty much had everything one could hope for in a vintage laptop. A great in-between OS, since Windows 98 does great with DOS games directly from the operating system, or you can just restart into DOS mode and run your crap from there. And it also does great with Windows 98 games and other software. so it has legacy features in both software and hardware, with this thing having a handy parallel and serial ports if you need those, as well as a PS2 port, and it also has some modern features like that beautiful TFT display, USB, and a DVD drive. It also packs plenty of performance, and we could even upgrade the memory or that hard drive if we choose to. For example, we might rig up an SSD or an SD card adapter in the future. I mean, damn, this thing went from being a disgusting, sticky, oily mess to one of my favorite vintage laptops. And seeing how this thing went from working overtime in some Vulcan Mechanics repair shop to playing games in a nice, warm, retro home, it just all makes me happy. And even though this thing was pretty much all set hardware and software wise, there was one more thing I wanted to try improving, and that's that top lid. And even though I've seen these sticky, degraded ThinkPad rubberized plastics, I've never actually tried fixing one. And what I wanted to try doing was scraping or sanding that crap down to the bare black finish. So let's see how that goes. I've started by giving this thing a good soak with some WD-40 since it did such a good job on the bottom portion. And I've used a plastic guitar pick to scrape that crap off before, but here it wasn't really working. The coating wasn't as worn, I guess, so I've resorted to using a razor scraper. I tried going gently and I was actually getting some nice, long, satisfying strips of that rubber. Nice. I've also tried using some alcohol and other chemicals to try and soften that crap out, and I'd say it worked decently. Once I got the majority off, I've used some very fine sandpaper to get the remainder of the stuff off. In the end, I was quite pleased with the result, and even though it wasn't perfect, you can tell that there are some patches and imperfection, but at least it's very clean and smooth. I've also reapplied those stickers, the model identifier and the serial number, and to me that's quite important. It gives the machine some authenticity and makes it more complete. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you did notice, I've installed a new track point nipple. I took this one from another parts machine. And at this point, to me, this guy is like an old retired veteran. It has some scars and scratches, sure, but now it's in a beach house in Florida after having a surgery, and I just know it's going to be appreciated for the rest of its days. And I'm sure I'm going to find this guy very useful for my future projects and videos, so I don't think this is the last time you'll be seeing it here. And the fact that we've saved this guy from potentially being recycled, it brings a smile to my face. And if it brings a smile to your face as well, you might want to check out some of my other videos. I do repairs, restorations, overviews, retrospectives, and all sorts of things on my channel, so if you like watching this type of content, feel free to subscribe. I do videos every week, and if you'd like to support what I do and throw a couple of bucks my way and fuel my collecting obsession, you can do so on Patreon for just $1 a month, or more if you'd like. If you'd like to chat with me and other users, you can join our Discord server. All the links will be in the video description. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.